Oh,
there you go.
very okay. Well, very subtle.
All right. All right. So my name is Lisa Topelko. I welcome you. I work for Vegreville and District FCSS. My coworker Emma Marie is also on this call. She's our tech wizard, and she is helping me with a lot of the things that are happening here this morning. We are pleased to welcome Stacy and Terri from the Hoarding Disorder Foundation of Alberta. Some of us are in the field and frontline workers with people who are showing some hoarding behaviors and some of these tendencies. So we know that Stacy Walker is a certified professional organizer. Terri Bailey has her MA in counseling, and they are both working with the Edmonton Hoarding Coalition. I didn't even know that such a thing existed, but I'm really, really glad that it does. We want to learn today about how to help individuals with the hoarding disorder to deal with the stigma that surrounds the hoarding disorder, and to provide evidence-based service opportunities in a safe and supportive environment to encourage individuals to reach out for help who have this disorder, to help family members and their friends to support them as well. And how can we as a community come together to address this issue when we see this happening to community members and friends and family. Now I pass this over. Oh, no, sorry, a couple things. If you haven't muted yourself, we're going to ask you to please do that. You'll notice that our chat function has been disabled. This is at the request of our presenters. This is to minimize distractions. You can use the hand up feature if you have a question as we're going through. There will be question and answer period at the end. Welcome again, and I pass this over to Stacy and Terri.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa. I just wanted to say I'm sorry if you guys are really used to using the chat function. Again, it's mostly because of my old brain. Stacy is more okay with it than me, but I find it really hard to present. I've found in the presentations that we've done when the chat boxes are popping up to everybody. So I just thought it would be, you'll get a better me if we don't have the chat function. And we really do want to encourage people to either put up their hand technology wise, or if you're not sure how to do that, to unmute and just say, excuse me, I have a question, or, we'd even rather that. So it's not that we don't want your feedback. We really, really do want your participation. Also, I am just going to take a moment just to scroll through. I know a lot of people have looks like most people have their pictures off. Yeah, they do. Just because, what I'm finding with this Zoom format is I still would love to, even just for a moment, just get a sense of us all together. There's this feeling like, we can still sort of be together, sharing a common experience. Oh, thank you. So I get to see some of your faces. Yeah, I don't know if some of you are old enough to remember Romper Room. That's what I feel like. Like, oh, I see Donna, I see Colleen, I see Mickey. But just to kind of get an idea of everything. Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everybody. One of these days soon, we can maybe do a follow-up in person. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing that, you guys. So what I'm going to do is I will get our PowerPoint or whatever it's called, our slideshow, whatever it's called on the screen here. I'm going to do that right now. There we go. So probably the first thing to do is just to introduce Stacy and I just a little bit. I am the therapist in the duo, and Stacy is the professional organizer. We've been working together in this field for quite a few years, so like 10 plus, a few little bit extra years. Stacy, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, and we really believe in working from this multidisciplinary perspective. We know, based on our experience and just from the research in the field, that working together as a community across disciplines is really the best way to support folks who struggle with hoarding. And so we're a little multidisciplinary team here. I'm wondering, Stacy, if there's anything more you think I should say. Uh-oh, it's not moving. Ah.
Oh dear.
Oh dear. That's okay. Stacy, why don't you do a little bit of introduction here about about your work and my work, and I'm gonna get out of this and get back in, and then it'll fix. Yeah.
Okay.
So, talk amongst yourselves.
Okay. Well, I'll talk. How's that sound? As Terri was saying, we work from this multidisciplinary approach, and we believe very strongly that that's the best approach, and that'll be more evident as we go through what we're going to talk about today. While we're waiting for the presentation to come up, I'll just give you a little background on the Hoarding Disorder Foundation. We started out with great support from the Canadian Mental Health Association back in 2010. And we started doing our groups, and CMHA was really awesome, providing us with space and finding us a bit of funds. And then CMHA's responsibilities and stuff expanded a couple of years ago, and they just couldn't accommodate us anymore. And so we said, oh, well, here's our opportunity to strike out on our own. And so we started working on the Hoarding Disorder Foundation. That turned into a monster, and took us a few years, but we did finally achieve charitable status in 2020. We were able to get some funding from the Edmonton Community Foundation, who has funded us and SAGE's programs in the past. So we're eternally grateful to the Edmonton Community Foundation for their support as well. And so we are running our groups right now. All I'm going to say about that is if you're interested in knowing more about the groups and how they're run, it's all on the HDFA website, the Hoarding Disorder Foundation website. And when we send you a resources package at the end of the day today, the website link and everything is going to be on that. So I just don't want to have to get into all the details about how our groups work. And then, yeah, we have big dreams for the Hoarding Disorder Foundation. We know that our programming is priority, and we've got to keep that running at the very least. But we are hoping to be able to do things like one-on-one support. We'd like to do much more training in this field, like the stuff that we're doing today, where we're wanting to work with some new protocols called trauma-informed interventions, which is an alternative to the clear-out methods that we know are damaging and traumatic and usually unsuccessful. We want to do educational programming for loved ones and other stakeholders who are interested in helping people with this. We want to do, full-on case management, and we would love to be able to put together a database of province-wide resource kind of directory. So we have big dreams and no money. So that's where the HCFA stands as of today. So let's get into the meat of our presentation today and start with Terri.
All right. So just to start with, we like to share this little piece about stigma. So what we know is that with mental health issues in general, and with hoarding very specifically, there is a very large stigma associated. We have people in our groups and our clients that we work with one-on-one, etc., who share a lot about the shame that they have inside, and about some of the perceptions that they receive from all sorts of different places. And this shame certainly is a barrier to them working on their stuff. We have some clients who still come to group and don't use their real name. We have some clients who have shared with us that they've been working with psychologists or psychiatrists for like 25 or 30 years who don't even know that they struggle with this problem. Same with some friends or colleagues, you know, that don't know. So that shame leads to a lot of fear, and you know, we're going to be talking sort of more about those sort of things as we go along. So what can we do about this? One thing is Stacy and I are really conscious of the language that we use. So, you know, we really believe that the language we use reflects sort of who we are as a society, how we think and care for others. And so what we try to do is really use person-centered language. So that doesn't mean that we don't use the word hoarding. We certainly do. We use the word hoarding all the time. But we don't call people hoarders, or we don't call a person a hoarder, because that's it's sort of implying that it's sort of all that a person is. A person is their problem. And what we're really working on is sort of understanding people as these whole, complex, interesting people who also have this problem of hoarding. So we'll say a person with lived experience of hoarding, a person with hoarding disorder, a person with challenges with the stuff. We often will just use the language that other people use themselves. So we have the language that we use, and we are also quite influenced by what's happening around us. So if you look at the, you know, on the left over here, it says City Hall mobilizes inspectors in war against hoarders. So right away, that's actually from the Vancouver Courier newspaper that we found a couple of years ago. So right away, you can see that there's this real us and them mentality set up. We have very sort of threatening types of words: mobilizes, war, hoarders, right? So, you know, if I were a person struggling with hoarding, this might make me scared. It's pretty extreme. What counts as crazies from Time magazine, when the DSM was shifting to include hoarding disorder as its own standalone disorder outside of OCD. So what counts as crazy, it's a little more subtle, but it still is sort of contributing to that stigma. And of course, there's the things like the TV shows. Stacy and I aren't big fans. Some of the TV shows are getting a little bit better than others, but they're quite sensationalized. They do, in our minds, tend to really highlight the stigmatizing pieces. Some of them are getting a little bit more conscious of that, and some of them still have titles of their shows that are really horrible things like She is a Pig and other things that I don't even think I'm going to say because I find it disturbing. So just us being aware of all of these messages that are around us, if we can do that, then I think we are supporting that reduction in stigma in this area. So now Stacy's going to talk a little bit about, well, what exactly is this hoarding business?
We feel that it's kind of important to mention or to talk about this because lots of stuff in a home doesn't always mean that it's a hoarding situation. So volume of possessions, of course, is important, but it's not a guarantee that that this person is hoarding or would qualify for a diagnosis. So as Terri was saying, the diagnostic manual, the DSM-5, has since 2013 included a standalone diagnosis for hoarding disorder. And I'm just going to run through a couple of the key points. But if you do have access to the DSM-5, I recommend reading the entire, it's not intense reading, a couple of pages in the DSM, and it is really helpful in understanding what the criteria is that they use for hoarding disorder, and understanding that doesn't give us, the qualifications to diagnose, of course. But it sure helps you to understand what's going on with people. So the main criteria are these three. The first one is the persistent difficulty in discarding or parting with possessions, and that is referring to the level of anxiety that is associated with letting go of possessions, regardless of their value or their actual value. And people will say that it feels impossible to tolerate. The level of anxiety is so high that it feels like they're literally losing a part of themselves. If somebody's feeling that kind of anxiety, then there's a chance that this could be a diagnosis of hoarding disorder. When we come to point 2, the item accumulation prevents living spaces from being used for their intended purposes, we are really talking about living spaces here. We're not talking about the attic and the garage. We're talking about the bedroom, the kitchen, the bathroom, even the living room, like the spaces that people need to live their daily life activities in a safe and functional, comfortable kind of way. So things like not being able to sleep in your bed or prepare food in your kitchen, and not being able to access under the sink for, to get repairs done, or not being able to access the furnace for repairs and the hot water tank, those kinds of things. If the item accumulation prevents those kinds of things, then you're looking at a potential hoarding situation. The significant distress that we're talking about is really indicated on the next slide there, Terri. There we go. It's all of these hoarding related impairment. And what's really key is to understand that absolutely everything you do is harder to do in a hoarded environment. So getting up in the morning, cooking a meal or preparing food, cleaning, absolutely everything you do is more complicated and more challenging and more difficult in a hoarded environment. So it affects almost every aspect of your life. And the hoarding related impairment, it hits on all of these points. Emotional distress is family stresses. Those relationship issues can be very, very isolating for people, so that they end up, trying to manage all of this with very little or no support. So for a diagnosis of hoarding disorder, a person must meet all three of those factors. So I just wanted to just make sure that that was, those are the must-haves of a diagnosis. But there are a couple of other things here as well. The specifiers is the level of acquisition and the level of insight. And acquisition, the reason they put this in as a specifier rather than an actual criteria is because there are situations where a person is not actually still acquiring in a conscious way, but they still would qualify for a hoarding disorder because of their inability to let things go. And the people who put together the diagnostic criteria felt that it would be unfair for those people to slip through the cracks, if they were trying to get help for this problem. So excessive acquisition can be a conscious, or usually is a conscious thing, and in my experience, it's usually present with most of the people that I've worked with, but it isn't an actual criteria, it's a specifier. Level of insight is the, is just, you're gonna fit into one of those categories. You either understand that this is a problem for you, you don't think it's much of a problem for you, or you absolutely don't think it's a problem for you, and it's everybody else's problem, and everybody should just leave you alone, right? So what we find is that the people that come to our groups are the people in that good or fair level of insight, because people do not tend to seek help unless they've acknowledged in their own minds that they have a problem. So the poor and absent insight are the people with their heels dug in, that they won't let anybody in the door. They don't want to have anything to do with you. That's that level of insight. And we are going to talk a little bit later about that. So I just want to pause for a quick second and see if there's any questions. I'm sure that was a really quick skip through the diagnostic criteria, so I'm sure there's lots of things going through people's minds. But is there anything that just is jumping up right now? If not, we'll move on, and Terri, you'll take over for a minute.
All right. So this problem of hoarding is quite complicated. And many of our clients will say, just tell me why I do this. Tell me why I have this problem. And we say, well, it's not one answer, is it? So let's explore this together. And what we do often is we get folks to develop their own model of hoarding. Or we also share this with, with loved ones and family members and friends and, professionals, just to help with the understanding of what's going on. So this is sort of a visual depiction. So on the left side of your screen, it says personal vulnerability factors. And we're going to explain that in more detail, but that's basically those things that create a vulnerability for hoarding. It doesn't mean it's the things that cause hoarding, but it creates a vulnerability. We're going to go into what that means. And then there's the information processing difficulties. So that's how the brain is working. And those things can sort of lead into, with some other things, these thoughts and beliefs. And oftentimes what we're talking about is thoughts and beliefs that are very rigid and inflexible and huge barriers to working on this stuff, to creating a safe environment. And when there's those very rigid thoughts and beliefs, they lead to these very big emotional responses, very intense emotional responses. which are, it says there, it says positive and negative reinforcement. So there's different ways that folks' behavior is reinforced. I'll give a quick example. Positive reinforcement is when you go to the dollar store and you find that perfect object, or to a garage sale and you get it. It's like, woohoo, I feel great. That feeling great is the positive reinforcement. So that increases the behavior of the acquiring. Or if a neighbor needs something that you've been saving for 20 years, right? Like that, mason jar lid number 0.4 or whatever, and you go get it and it's been, it's like, woo, look at me. I'm the person who's helping. It's positive. It's so reinforcing. The negative reinforcement is, what that means is that when something yucky gets taken away. So basically, if you're working on your stuff and there's huge anxiety as a result, and you decide to just, I'm trying to make a decision about this item, and my anxiety is just like going off the charts, and I just say, I'll think about it later. That feels better. So these behaviors are reinforced, and then we get the hoarding behaviors. So that's a little bit simplistic, but you kind of get the idea. So we're just going to go into it in a little more detail. What are those personal vulnerabilities that were on the left side of the visual depiction? So we're looking at genetics. We're looking at family role modeling. Who in your world was saving everything, or who in your world wasn't saving anything and didn't allow you to save as a child or something. You weren't allowed to keep your toys, or you moved a lot, or, comorbidities. So Stacy's going to talk about this before. Oftentimes we do this after this part, Stacy, but that's okay. Comorbidities meaning what are the other mental health disorders that a person has. So Stacy's going to talk about that later. Unprocessed grief and loss we see a lot. We see that there are traumas or adverse life effects that are unresolved, and physical health challenges. So, and other things too. But these are things that create vulnerabilities, and it's important for people to understand what they are so that they can really apply it when they're trying to challenge themselves. So just to say a little more about that genetic piece. So there's the genetic piece in terms of first level family members. Over 3/4 of folks with hoarding problems report that, a parent or a very close family member also struggled with hoarding. So there's that piece. And then in more recent research, this has come up that there's these genetic markers for personality traits of perfectionism, procrastination, and decision-making challenges. And if you sort of look in the middle where all those cross over, that's sort of the perfect storm that could contribute to this problem. So on the right side of that visual depiction was those information processing challenges. So that's the executive functioning. That's like how our brain is working. And we do see some very sort of uniform ways that folks with hoarding, the way that their brains work. And not all of these things are experienced by all people who hoard, but it's things that we see typically. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I'm just going to I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So the first two, actually. So categorization is, it's like how does your brain put things into categories? And what we see with folks who hoard is sort of two different scenarios. We see hyper categorizing, and we see sort of no categories at all. And the hyper categorizing is where items are so special and unique that they need their own category. So I'm going to use the example of this pen that I have here. So it's like a medium ink black pen that has a clicky thing on top, and it's got like a nice soft thing right here. So for somebody who hoards, this kind of pen may be its own category. So what I mean by that is maybe there's a category for black, clicky, medium ink pens, and there might be a category for blue, clicky, medium ink pens, and there might be a category for red pens, and there might be a category for fine pens, and there might be a category, and it just keeps going on and on and on and on. And pretty soon, there's so many categories that it's almost impossible to follow through on our systems. Where does this even go? Like, if there's only two, you know, it's like we've got 15 categories of pens. Where does it go? You know where it goes? It gets put down wherever, those clutter magnets, that's where it goes. The other idea, the other way of categorizing is that there's just everything is in one category. So I'm working with a client right now where that's the case, because I tend to see more this hyper categorizing piece. But I'm working with a client right now where she's experiencing this other, where everything is in one category. So for example, with clothes are just one category. So clothes just sort of can go all in one big heap. And that includes shoes, all kinds of clothes, coats, shirts, short sleeve, long sleeve, sweaters, everything, one category, which also makes it very challenging. So that's one way that the brain tends to work. The other way that I just want to talk about is this association piece. This comes up a lot. Association means that the brain just keeps generating ideas. It's a very, very creative way of thinking, but the brain doesn't stop generating ideas. And for folks who hoard, one of the ways that their brain doesn't stop generating ideas is with how to use an item. So let's just give the example of a bottle cap, for example. So I'm wondering, and I know it's weird on Zoom, but I would love it if somebody would unmute and tell me what they think they could use a bottle cap for. Would anybody be willing to do that?
Nothing.
Yes, nothing. It goes in the garbage. That's sort of where my brain goes. I can't
Art.
think. Art. What kind of art?
Making a mural with various colored bottle caps.
Yeah.
Making a mural. Yeah. What other kind of art could you make with a bottle?
Christmas tree decoration. Oh yeah, there you go.
Christmas decoration, mobiles.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? What else could you do with a bottle cap?
Use it for a checker on a checkerboard.
Use it for, right, a missing piece on a game, right? Yeah, what else?
To hold something like water.
Yes, like it could be like a little gerbil watering dish or something.
Make a rug to clean mud off your shoes.
You could use it, yes. You could use it to clean mud off your shoes.
Strung together in a garden to scare away the squirrels.
Ah, yes, scare away the squirrels, absolutely. Okay, so you see where I'm going with this. Between us, we've been able to come up with several really good ideas of how we could use bottle caps. So if you can imagine that your brain is generating, this is what it does every day, all day long, is it just generates these ideas. That is association. And it can be a gift, and in some cases, it can be a curse. So in the case of being able to let go of items for people who struggle with hoarding, it can be a little bit of a curse. And there's all of these other ways that the brain works as well that can produce some challenges. But what I want to say is what we talk to our clients about, what's in the literature, is that biology isn't destiny. So just because we know that our brains work a certain way doesn't mean that there's not something we can do about it. And identifying how it's working is typically the first step. And then we sort of figure out the strategies around it. So let's just say this. So I talked about those rigid, inflexible beliefs that can get in the way. That's sort of like that middle part of the visual depiction. So we were just talking about association, that creative way of thinking, that generating ideas. So if you look at on this slide, the third one down, it says utility opportunity. So that is a belief about usefulness. So keep in mind that this isn't just a belief, a sort of a gentle belief, because most of us have these beliefs some of the time. These beliefs for folks who hoard are very intense, rigid, inflexible beliefs that are automatic. They just come up. There's no sort of thinking it through like, does this fit for this situation? It's like, no, these beliefs are there. So if you look at number 3, utility opportunity, this belief about usefulness, it's like this. If this item is useful, I need to keep it. Many of us want to keep useful things. And if you go back to thinking about what we were just talking about with the association, right? Thinking and thinking, then I would say most, if not always, or all items in the home that they can come up with a use for. So if you can think of a use for it, then you need to keep it. And if you attempt to think about letting it go, it creates high levels of anxiety. I would love to share with you about all of these. I think they're quite fascinating and share examples from clients, but I'm just going to share this one other one. This belief about identity. So this belief is that if this item relates to my past, who I was in the past, if it relates to who I am now or who I would like to be now, if it relates to who I would like to be or how I see myself in the future, it connects with my identity and I need to keep it. And if I let it go, it's almost like it's that this potential of who I am and how I want to engage with the world is gone. So a lot of very strong beliefs that lead to those big emotions that we were talking about. So I just have a little picture here. So this is, I took a picture of these pieces of paper, which are about, I don't know, like they're about like this big. And then the smaller ones are folded over about like that. And they're just little written notes. And they're from a client, and we found thousands of these pieces of paper. And he was writing down, sort of keeping track of activities and things that he completed at work. So I'm wondering if you have a sense of what kind of meaning might be connected to these items. And I would love it if somebody would unmute and share their idea with us.
Accomplishment, like a sense of accomplishment.
Yes, a sense of accomplishment. Absolutely. I did this. It's like a sense of worth. Yes. What else?
Feeling of usefulness.
Feeling of usefulness. Yes. Again, it kind of leads back into that feeling of worth. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I think also accountability for whatever reason. He may have to feel like he needs to prove himself somehow.
Yeah. Yes. That is very true. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say measuring one's value
by stacking it up.
Right, measuring one's value, yes. And all of those things kind of connect with that idea of identity. Yeah, absolutely. Any other ideas?
Proof of his existence.
Proof of his existence. Yeah, actually, it can be very existential. Yeah.
Leaving a legacy for someone else to see.
Yep, yep. I existed, leaving a legacy. Yeah. And there's a couple of other things that we didn't talk about, you know, when I was talking about these, you know, in that whole list of beliefs, but one is completeness. It's like having a set. And once you start saving them, there's this feeling like you need to keep adding to it. It needs to be a complete set. So every day writing these notes, so there's that feeling like it's not complete. Like if I said, well, why don't we just let go of 10 of them just to practice? Oh, you know, that doesn't feel very good, right? They need to be complete. And the other one is that we tend to see quite a bit is memory. So what we see quite often is a very exaggerated sense of an expectation of what we're supposed to remember. So somehow there's this idea like, I'm going to remember these details of all of these things that I did. And so that can be a big one for some folks, and lots of other things too. So just before we go on, Stacy's going to talk a little bit more. I'm wondering if there's any questions about this stuff that I've talked about. Okay, so I'm just going to say, oh, somebody has a question?
Well, not really, but I just wonder where all those sheets of paper are now.
Oh, good question. I'm so glad you asked. We got rid of them. Yay! It took some time, but they are gone. They are gone.
Yay!
Good yes. Yes. It was such a good job. And so just a little bit of understanding about the kinds of meanings or the kinds of beliefs and how strong they can be, and how they can get in the way. Okay, Stacy.
Okay, so this is the myth-busting portion of the presentation, because a lot of times, those of us who are working with people with hoarding struggles think we know what's going on, and we really, we really don't. And so, first of all, the demographics of hoarding is it crosses all socioeconomic and cultural. We find hoarding absolutely all over the world in all socioeconomic and you don't have to have a lot of money to hoard. So you don't have to. So it's sort of this real common denominator across all populations. What we don't have is Canadian statistics. And so most of what we do have is from American research. And we are making a bit of an assumption that our statistics would be kind of, pretty much on par. So the most recent estimates are 2 to 6% of the population would qualify for a diagnosis of hoarding disorder. I had to, just to wrap my brain around that, I had to do a little bit of, work in the numbers here. And in Edmonton, with a population of just under 1 million, so we're just talking about Metro Edmonton, not the satellite cities or, smaller communities, just Metro Edmonton, at just under 1 million, 2% equates to 19,600 people. And 5% equates to 49,000 people. it's a number that is kind of it's hard to imagine. But if we just look at our population in our own communities and go with the lowest possible number, it's still a number that is very, very difficult to manage in terms of providing supports for. A lot of people tend to think that women are have more hoarding tendencies than men, and what we've found is that it's actually more women tend to seek treatment or look for support later in life, and so they kind of they get found to need these supports more frequently than men, but actually the tendency to hoard may actually be greater in men than women. We used to think of it as an age-related challenge, and it is not. What we have found with the research that's most current is that the age of onset is actually about 13 years old. So this behavior is well ingrained by the time a person is an adult. And of course, it's, they're entrenched in this behavior by the time they get to sort of that later life stages. And that all of these things make hoarding disorder that much more difficult and complicated to treat. One of the myths that I really love to bust is that education ranges widely. There is no evidence to support that there's a lower intelligence factor. In fact, the opposite seems to be true. The people that I have worked with and the people that we've had in our groups tend to be incredibly intelligent, incredibly creative brains. And we have everybody from university, university graduates and doctors and, with doctorates and PhDs, all the way through to people that have and are living on the street. So it's education or intelligence level has nothing, again, to do with it. One of the ones that's not on the form here is that squalid conditions are uncommon among treatment seekers. So it's important to recognize that hoarding does not always lead to squalor. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the whole squalor issue in a few minutes, but I just thought it was important to point that out. And the other one that's not on the slide is that the evidence is showing that this behavior escalates. It does not get better on its own. And without support and help, it has a persistent and worsening course, and it just simply will not get better without some sort of, I don't want to use the word intervention, but without support and education and the person with hoarding challenges absolutely has to challenge their own beliefs and get out of those thinking patterns that have got them really entrenched. So yeah, hopefully there's been a few things there that you weren't aware of before, and we've busted a few myths. On the next slide, we are going to bust a few more myths. If we can move
Stacy, sorry. Yeah. For some reason, it wouldn't advance it, but it is now. So there we go.
It got stuck.
It got stuck.
It got stuck, which is a thing about hoarding. We get stuck. So this is a little bit more of the myth busting that I think is really important, but it's also really important for understanding why hoarding disorder is so very, very complicated and expensive in many ways to treat. Before the DSM-5, hoarding disorder was just this little paragraph underneath obsessive compulsive disorder as a subset of. And through lots of research and you know, looking at the treatment versus the success rates with obsessive compulsive disorder, they just said, you know what, it's not the same thing. And if you look at this chart, obsessive compulsive disorder as a comorbid mental health condition is way down there at 17%. What we have found with the research is that major depressive disorder is actually a real factor in half the cases of people with hoarding disorder will have major depressive disorder as well. They may even have more than 2 mental health diagnoses. So a person can have, you know, a bit of post-traumatic stress disorder, some generalized anxiety disorder, and hoarding disorder. So it gets more and more complicated and very difficult to treat because of the sheer complicated, you would treat one of these in one way and the other in a completely different way. It's a very complicated situation. The other thing that I want to make a note of on this comorbidity factor is that a lot of us think that hoarding disorder is attributable to some traumatic event in a person's life. And what the research has shown again is that that is not actually true. There can be a traumatic event in a person's life that has contributed, but what Terri was talking about earlier with all those vulnerability factors, those vulnerabilities were already there. So the traumatic event has exacerbated the behavior that would have probably been in play anyway. So I've heard so many people go, I know exactly when this started. This started when that person experienced a fire in their home and they lost all their stuff. And that's when this, and it's, you know, that will definitely have affected this person's behavior, but they probably were hoarding already, or at least had shown some signs of leaning to that vulnerability in the first place. So that's, I find that that's a really interesting factor. Hoarding disorder is just a really unique puzzle in absolutely every person that struggles with it, and it really has to be addressed on a very individual basis. The one last statistic that I'm going to mention is that only 8% of people with hoarding disorder have no other mental health condition associated with it. So 98% of people with, or pardon me, 92% of people with hoarding disorder have something else going on as well. So really complicated, really difficult to challenge. Okay, what hoarding is not. Collecting is not hoarding. Generally, when you have somebody who is a collector, there's a real emphasis on quality versus quantity. With hoarding, there's going to be a reverse. Everything that is associated with that thing is worth keeping, right? With that category of collecting. And usually with people with hoarding disorder, they'll have many collections, whereas somebody who's collecting, they're going to have just 1 or 2 very serious collections. Now, that's not to say that collecting doesn't sometimes cause problems, because sometimes people go a little overboard with their collecting, and they, run themselves into some financial difficulties or some family relationship stressors, or, those kind of things can happen. But it's not hoarding, and it's important to recognize that. Chronic disorganization is also not hoarding. There's chronic disorganization just has a couple of features that there are three main features. The first one is that the disorganization undermines the quality of life as opposed to the volume of possessions. The disorganization has been a lifelong struggle, and that repeated self-help attempts have failed. But there's just less with chronic disorganization. I guess you would just say that there's less emphasis on the volume of possessions or the amount of stuff, as opposed to just the level of disorganization. So chronic disorganization, there can be some, a little bit of too much stuff in the equation, but it's again not qualifying for a diagnosis of hoarding disorder. Now, animal hoarding, I'm not going to get into animal hoarding and squalor in a really big way, but animal hoarding is the one that really captures the media attention every time. You really get that, that sense of the stigma that's associated with hoarding. This is what people's, minds tend to go to. And so what I want to say about animal hoarding, and there's more research being done now about animal hoarding, but it is quite separate from object hoarding. Oftentimes, object hoarding is present as well in an animal hoarding situation. But what I believe needs to happen here is that we need to take a different perspective from what we currently do, is a strictly punitive approach. We go in, we traumatize everybody by just removing the animals, taking care of the animals, which is very, very important. And I don't want to undermine that, but at the same time, all we do with the people involved is we take this punitive approach, and we want to punish them and fine them and give them, and we do nothing to help them. We do nothing about the behavior. And so what has happened in many cases that I've seen on the media is that we just go over to the next province and find them doing the same thing again in another place. So this is what we know about hoarding behavior, is that if you don't treat it, it just continues and it gets worse. And so we really need to find a different way to approach this problem and help the human component here. So that's what I wanted to say about animal hoarding. And we're just going to talk a little bit about squalor. And what's the most important thing about squalor is that it's not technically a part of the diagnostic criteria for hoarding disorder. In short, it is filth and degradation due to neglect. These kind of situations I have found quite often with people living in squalid conditions. It's not that they have any difficulty getting rid of things. They are just simply overwhelmed and have no idea how to approach the problem. That's not always the case. Sometimes getting rid of the items is challenging, and Terry's going to talk about a particular case in a minute here. But oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's just that things have somehow gotten so out of control that the person is just simply overwhelmed and unable to to tackle the situation. Treatment is a little bit different, and we don't, again, we're at the very, very infant stages of learning about this particular behavior and figuring out what to do about it, which is kind of interesting because Diogenes syndrome was this very thing, and it goes back to Greek mythology days. And so, I mean, this is a situation or a condition that has been recognized for, you know, time immemorial. So, so it's funny that we haven't come up with any ways to help those people. And it's important also to note that hoarding does not always lead to squalor. It's entirely possible to have a very clean, a very organized hoard or hoarded home. It doesn't always lead to this, but of course, as I was saying before, everything is more difficult in a hoarded home. So hoarding can lead to squalor for sure. So Terri, you want to tell us about this particular case?
Yeah, I do. Well, funny. Yes, I would like to share. Yeah, and like, so I know that there is research, like Stacy said, going on in squalor, and we don't have a lot of that, but I just want to say something anecdotally from the clients that I've worked with, that oftentimes with the squalor, there are other beliefs that are, you know, we were talking about those really rigid and flexible beliefs, that there are other things going on in terms of the squalor around, like paranoid thinking about neighbors, friends. There's often, I hear like some really onerous systems around garbage and recycle, and that create huge problems. But that's just, I just want to say that that is anecdotal. That is from my own experience working with folks. So this particular client, so the before picture was what was happening when I first came in to do an assessment. And the after picture there is sort of after we'd been working for several months, just on the kitchen. There's a whole house. And most of the stuff that was in there is garbage. And he was able to let go of the garbage quite easily once we got going, and we sort of addressed some of those paranoid thoughts and what have you that I talked to you about. However, this particular person also struggles with hoarding. It's not a whole house full, but it's still in the middle. It's still pretty extreme. So we worked on all of this. And then here you can sort of see where the hoard was starting to develop. So as we're picking through the garbage, these are the things that were discovered, and they don't have a home, can't be let go of, et cetera, et cetera. So that pile's not that big. It's not that big of a deal. And the house is quite full, or was quite full, of piles like that. So this particular person has done very well. And part of it is that we've been able to work together for quite a long period of time. So I've been working with this person for 5 years. So this is where if we could just look at the same picture. So this is where we are right now. This is just the kitchen. Of course, we've got the other parts of the home that we've worked on, but we've been working together for 5 years. And we are just waiting now, because all of the items there have been dealt with. There's safety and functionality in the rest of his home. There's still some problem areas that we're working on, but the safety piece is there. And we're going to talk about harm reduction right away here. We're waiting to get a repair done on the floor because the foundation was damaged. That fridge never worked, so that he can get a new fridge and get the fridge, the kitchen fully functional. And this has been maintained. So ever since he did this work, he has been able to maintain. So previously he couldn't wash his dishes in the sink. You can pretty well see that. He would do it in the tub and couldn't prepare food. So now he is doing all of those things and he's maintaining. Okay, so I want to ask if there are any questions about anything or just about this piece that we were talking about. Anybody feel like unmuting and sharing their question if they have one?
I have a question.
Sure.
I wanted to ask Paige, yeah. Is the hoarding disorder like a lifelong diagnosis? Because they're always going to have that experience, or no? Do they actually like overcome? And this individual is keeping it that way. So I was thinking like maybe there's a chance to just overcome.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So this is how I'm going to answer that, is that it's a lifelong journey and there is recovery. And what recovery means is that you need to pay attention. So there is, you know, with people who hoard in particular, my experience is that the behavior doesn't go away completely. That they figure out a way to do it so that they're safe and they're functioning and it's not so prevalent in their life. And then there's still a little bit of the tendencies and that they have to pay attention so that it doesn't exacerbate again. But it's still good news. Does that answer your question, Paige?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'm very excited.
I have a question.
Sure.
Mine is just, what is the motivation most people have for getting help?
Ooh, that's another good question. So
yeah, is it because they're being told they have to, or?
Yeah. So again, in my experience, oftentimes people seek help when there's external pressure. Or like, so that might mean, you know, landlords or inspections. It could be family members, or they're really realizing and connecting with the fact that there's things that are very important to them that they don't have as a result of what's going on in the home. So that could be, for example, so my daughter won't let my grandchildren come over because she doesn't think it's safe. Things like that. So there's this external pressure, or there's this real connection to the things that matter to them that they're not getting. And sometimes people are just really realizing just in and of themselves how much space and time they take up. Like, I mean, creative space and time in their brain. It's like this constant working on the stuff, and not being able to really engage in life the way that they want to. So there's some people where it's all coming from them, but very often there's this external thing going on. Would you agree with that, Stacy?
Yeah, and all of those are reasons for seeking help, and also a life event can kind of jar a person into reality. We've had people coming into, it doesn't always have to be an eviction. It can be just, my landlord is selling the property and I have to find a new place to live, and I'm just so overwhelmed. And it's not necessarily that there's that real negative eviction type of pressure. It can be just a life event. Sometimes it can be the loss of a relationship, where somebody's just a little bit jarred into realizing that if they don't do something, they're facing a rather lonely future.
Yeah, and the other thing that brings people in is sort of the developmental time in life, like in our older years. Because people are thinking, you know, we start to think differently, right? We're like, okay, well, I'm 56. How many more years of life will I be in good physical health? And do I want to leave this for my kids? Do I want to leave this mess? So we hear a lot of those sorts of things too. Yeah, and unfortunately, we've had some kind of extreme examples of that, which are really sad. We had one client who, we didn't know this, but he basically came because he was planning to kill himself, and he didn't want to leave a mess for those loved ones that he was leaving behind, and he ended up doing that. So that's a very sad story.
Mm-hmm. We've also had, I think that kind of jarred me a little bit.
I know, I'm a little, yeah.
Yeah, we've had that situation. We've also had, just, you know, later in life, a lot of people come to a place where they need supports, they need help. And that's when, you know, a support worker of some kind, either a, you know, a home care or family members go in to help, and that's when it's discovered. And so that's when things become, you know, you need help, and we're going to start looking for the right kind of help. And that's, I believe, again, this is anecdotally, but I believe that that's why we had this impression of it being an age-related condition, is because so many people were just not, I'm going to use the word, found out until they were later in life and needed those extra supports from the community. And that's when, you know, so that's when they have to seek those supports.
Did that answer the question? All right, so we're going to take a break soon, but before we take our break, we do have something quite interesting, I think. So, oh, it didn't forward it again. So irritating. Why is that happening? We don't know. Okay, I am going to fix that here, just a second. Okay. All these things are popping up on my screen. Hang on here. What the heck? Okay, there we go. Okay. Can you see the slide, Stacy? Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're gonna listen to a video, and we're gonna watch a video too. And I just want to set this up. First of all, I just want to thank our client Jane. She gave us permission to use her first name for allowing us to share this. So basically, what happened was, I asked Jane, this was my counseling room back in the day, and I asked Jane if she would come be interviewed and that I would record her and that we would use it for educational purposes. And she really liked the idea of it being used for educational purposes because she's like, this is really important. People need to understand about this problem. So basically I said to her, come on in. And then I said, I'm not sure if you can hear this first question that I asked. She brought her bag and her bag had various and sundry things in it, and she had left it upstairs, and my counseling room is in the basement. And I said to her, so, you know, when you're thinking about that brush that you have in your bag, maybe you should just let it go. And keep in mind that she knows that this is a conversation. We're not actually working on anything. We're just talking about it. So this is what happens.
You know what? I need to donate this brush. You've got lots of brushes. I bet you have like.
You know how long?
Have a lot of brushes.
You know how long it took me to find this brush? Back in when I went out with a boyfriend, back in 1983, we were in Winnipeg, and it was Christmas time. He bought me a brush, and it's for long hair. And I wore that brush out. And the year before last, Marlene and I went to Winners. Like, I never go to Winners. And we were looking at hair things, and I found the brush. It wasn't exactly the same, but it was this brush.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't care the price of it or anything like that. I always care about the price. I didn't care about the price. I bought this brush. So for you to say to donate this brush, I'm like, oh my God, of all the things. The comb, I've got another comb, but the brush, I mean, that's like, okay, 84, 94, 2004. Like, that's like that many years.
Okay. What about
so
the comb?
Funny.
What about the comb?
Well, the comb's really good for my hair. It's for my long hair. But, you know, I do have another one.
Right.
You know, so that would be a little easier. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, funny. Okay.
See, now that's how it is. You know, that would be a perfect example to show on the thing, right? Because,
Yeah.
Oh my God, what do you mean?
Yeah.
You know, like, panic attack, you know.
And I think we weren't even dealing with the actual item. We were just talking about it.
Yeah. That was almost a panic attack. I'm like, okay. Anything else you'd like to talk about?
Okay. All right. So just before we take a break, I'm wondering, after looking at that video, I'm wondering what you guys noticed, sort of based on some of the things that we've talked about already today. Something that
one thing that struck me was how she laughed so much, but it kind of made me sad because I felt like it was almost a way of bullying herself and belittling it in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and using the humor to cope with the anxiety. Yeah.
I want to say we have to respect the memories, because I'm just thinking of, we get a lot of calls at our FCS that's saying, you know, this senior has to move out or move on and their place is full. Can you come clean it out? Number one, no. But the other thing is, yeah, it's the memory. They're attached to the memory, not the object.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some real attachment because of the memory, the sentimental piece of it. And you heard Jane had this whole story, this whole memory, right, Lynn? Connected to that brush.
And for a lot of younger people, it's the object, had nothing to do with the object, had to do with that memory that brought back such good feelings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say that obviously you had been working with this individual for some time, and they seem to have a fair amount of insight and awareness, and yet the gap in insight was so evident, you know, that even though there was complete awareness around the issues that you've been working on, here was a moment when there was a total gap of insight, and not connecting that seemed really apparent to me.
Yeah, and it's almost like if there was insight, it's like her body took over in that moment, right? She just, because she described a panic, like that was almost a panic attack. And yeah, it's like, there's like a physiological response. Yeah, so that any insight sort of goes out the window a little bit. Yeah, thanks, Mickey. What else? Stacy, is there anything else that you'd like to point out about that?
I can't think off the top of my head, but I know that there have been lots of observations. Certainly the panic attack, the different terms that she used. That's what stands out for me every time. I've seen that video lots of times, and every time she says that was almost a panic attack, it really stands out for me. That because you weren't gonna. There was nothing that had to happen in this case, in this situation. You weren't asking her to throw it away. You were just talking about it. Mm-hmm. And even just the thought. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate what Mickey was saying there, because of the work that we've been doing lately with all of the work we've been doing in group and stuff, that there's that disconnect that, you know, all of a sudden the reasoning brain, it just cannot overcome that emotional response. That, you know, her reasoning just is out the window. We're in this other space now with where these automatic thoughts and these automatic responses just take over.
Yeah.
They also categorized it, I think, by always bringing up its for long hair specifically. Even the comb, it was like a specific comb for long hair only. So
right. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I was thinking, and special. I was thinking too that she didn't care how much money she spent. She said, usually I think about how much does this cost? Mm-hmm. And then she said, but I didn't care how much it cost.
Right.
Right. So there is that, I spent money on this. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's also something that kind of stands out to me a little bit that I hear, like, I never go to Winners, but I went, it's like, it was meant to be. It's assigned this very special kind of quality, you know, it was meant to be. It says all the stars were aligned.
It's destiny.
It's destiny that I have this, right? Like,
and I wondered about the history that it's for long hair. Mm-hmm. Was there something in her childhood that maybe she had long hair and they used tools that weren't appropriate, and so there was pain, or maybe her mother said things like, you're having too long hair is too much work for me, it's so hard. So that when she got something that worked for long hair, that it made such a difference in her life that it was important to her. Maybe finally she could manage it in a way that was, you know, useful, productive, non-painful. You don't know what the history is. So
Bonnie, that is so right. Because once we start exploring, then we find out those details, those connections, and that the meaning is multi-layered. And sometimes it's connected to very important things. Yeah.
The other thing about what Bonnie said is that, you know, talks about how long it took her to find that brush. So she was able to explain all the other brushes and combs by the presence of or the action of trying to find this one brush that was. So I don't know whether they collected brushes or not, but it seems like they might have. And this was a great explanation. This brush was the one that she'd always been seeking. You know, it was I hear that now.
And also the fact that she even has this recollection and this memory of all of these other things. Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Such good comments, you guys. I think it's time for you guys to have a break. So let's take a 10-minute break. So we'll come together at 10 after 10, and then we will regale you with many more interesting things. So we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Are people starting to come back?
This is Sandra. I just want to say this is so interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sandra. We are kind of whipping through it at a blistering pace here. So I just find it absolutely fascinating, all of the stuff that we've already covered this morning. It's just endlessly interesting, endlessly challenging work. I do really love it.
You can tell.
Well, that means a lot. Thank you. So I think we should get started.
Yes, everybody back.
It's already 2 minutes after the time that we said we were going to get started. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but Stacy can be very intense. No, I'm just kidding.
What we like to joke about is Terri is the therapist and she's the, how do you feel about that? And then Stacy is the professional organizer and I'm the one that says, and what are you gonna do about it?
So our group members joke about that quite a bit. Yeah. Although I would say that Stacy is quite a softie. So she's,
yeah, I talk a big game, but I'm not very good at the implementation part.
You do the how do you feel and what are you going to do?
Yeah, right? Yeah. I do find that that's a really interesting thing, though, when you are working from this multidisciplinary kind of thing. Is when somebody brings up a challenge or something that's going on for them, and my first response is to try to find a solution. Is to try to come up with some strategy, or to propose something that's really practical. And Terri's approach is always from that therapeutic, let's figure this out, what's going on, and all of that. And it's I don't know. I feel like it's valuable for both of those things to be a part of the program that we work from.
Yeah, because what we're finding, and we're going to get into some practical strategies right away here, and so this is sort of part of that, is that if we try to provide solutions for folks right away, without giving them space to share how they're feeling, oftentimes you're going to get the yeah, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I can't do this because of that. Or yeah, but, right? And so then that's our cue. Oh yeah, just sit back for a little bit, give some space. And then we can do that together, So, all right. Well, let's get going. And that's a whole other presentation, the communication one. All right, here we go.
Yeah, so we felt that because when we do these presentations out in the community, and we're in sort of the smaller communities where they bring in all kinds of people from their own community. We can have people in the audience with lived experience of hoarding. We can have people that are from fire and police and community standards for your town. All of those kind of people can be in the audience, but we felt that most of the people in this audience were likely going to be sort of the social work kind of and in-home support type people. So we thought that just talking a little bit about some of the assessment tools, or what's available in terms of assessment tools, would be useful for you folks. So, so these are the ones that we like the most and that we use the most. There are actually 15 published assessment tools. And I believe there's a study going on out of UBC right now that is kind of taking all of these tools and trying to come up with a universal tool that will be introduced as sort of the standard, the gold standard, or the actual standard that we're going to be using. But for right now, yeah.
Stacey, can I just say a little something about that?
Yeah, would you?
Yeah, because I'm on a committee that is through UBC with one of our favorite kind of biggies in the hoarding field is Dr. Christiana Bradiotis. And we're going to be talking because Edmonton Coalition is actually bringing her in as well as another biggie in the field in October. So we'll share that information with you at the end. But Christiana and some of her colleagues, and she's got a steering committee built, and I'm on that committee, which is kind of cool, is developing a new assessment that they feel sort of addresses everything that is to be used in a multidisciplinary way. So anybody can use it. And so it's going to be kind of exciting to see sort of what arises from that. So I'd say like within the next year or so. So yeah. Okay, sorry, Stacy.
I think one of the reasons that we have so many different things going on is, you know, hoarding's the research and the real sort of focused attention on hoarding disorder in research fields is relatively new compared to most of the other, or many of the other mental health areas. We have, you know, we've got very little data to work with, and so lots of people have tried to come up with lots of different things, and right down to these assessment tools. Christiana Bradiotis came up with the Holmes Multidisciplinary Hoarding Risk Assessment first, and it is really, it's a really short, easy assessment, and it is really about hoarding risk. It's about whether or not there are safety issues in the home. And so that a person can really make you know, a judgment about how critical a person needs to address some of these issues. So we are going to also send out at the end of the day today a resource list, and these assessment tools will be on the list, and how to access these tools. And actually, if you Google any of these, literally what you see on that slide, they are all very easily accessed through Google. So they're, you know, they're very, very commonly used assessment tools. So the Holmes one is a really, really short one, just to, you know, assess risk and safety hazards in the home. The clutter image rating scale is a 9-picture series, and Dr. Randy Frost put this together, and it is a staged series of photographs that that just, I believe this is a really excellent tool for somebody who lives in a hoarded environment. For them to say, what you'll often find is when they're looking at these pictures, they'll think that their environment is, you know, one way or the other from what you might see. So if you think that this environment is a 6, somebody who lives in this environment might put it at a 4 or an 8. Like they'll either go one way or the other, but it's, you know, this whole perception. And it's really interesting for people to, with lived experience of hoarding, to have that comparison, because it's really very eye-opening for them oftentimes. When we work with people in using the Buried in Treasures text, having them visualize their space is an exercise that it's always quite eye-opening for them, because they just don't. Have you ever heard of the term clutter blindness? they don't see it the same way as other people see it. So it's a really interesting tool, and then it's a really interesting tool for you as well, so that you can kind of give yourself some way to rate the level of hoarding in an environment. The ICD Clutter Hoarding Scale is the Institute for Chronic Disorganization. It's an organization in the US that doesn't focus entirely on hoarding. However, this is a really good tool for discussions between the different disciplines. So if you're trying to explain to, you know, the community standards person in your town what level of hoarding you're dealing with, this particular scale works on a 1 to 5 level rating scale, and it really gives people a good idea of what they're dealing with without actually having to go inside and see the space. This particular scale is also available in a long form and a short sort of quick reference guide, and the quick reference both of them will give you sort of some idea of what kind of PPE you should be wearing if you're dealing with whatever level of situation you're going into. So it's a really good tool. And I've heard a lot of social workers use level 4, level 5. So I suspect that this particular hoarding scale is out there in the community. A lot of people are actually using it. And the last one that we've got listed there is the savings cognitions inventory. And I think, Terri, you were going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, just a little bit, because when we talk about how do we know if somebody's hoarding, the other scales that we put up there are great, those other assessment tools, but they really are measuring the level of clutter. And what we were telling you before is that sometimes the level of clutter isn't what's telling us if the person is actually hoarding or not. They could be, you know, like if somebody's experiencing major depression, like Stacy said, it could have got out of control, then they have a physical injury, then they don't do it, then it gets more overwhelming. And all of a sudden we have what looks like a really hoarded home, or there's a little sort of tendency towards attachment to the stuff, but once you get in there, it's quite easy to deal with. So the savings cognition inventory is an assessment tool that really looks at those attachments. And that's what will tell us if this is a hoarding situation or not. So we just gave it a couple of examples of what's in this inventory. And Stacy already made reference to this, but you know, throwing this away is like throwing away a part of me. And so people will often score, you know, in the 5, 6, 7 range in this. Losing this possession is like losing a friend. Throwing this away means wasting valuable opportunity. We talked about that. I'm ashamed when I don't have something like this when I need it. And often the scores are quite high, right? So we're dealing with some really strong things. So this inventory is nice to give us an idea of those attachments. So how do we've talked about all of this stuff, and we want to spend some time talking about, well, what the heck do we do? How do we help?
Right. So, what's really important is what we're currently doing, or what we've been doing historically, isn't working. And so I think that this "how do we help" section is really important, because we need to do things somewhat differently. So the first step is to figure out why people dig their heels in, and you know, why do they refuse help? Why do they not want you to come into their home? And so I think we have time to talk a little bit about this. The poor insight piece is often, you're going to hear things like, I like living like this. It's not my problem, it's your problem, leave me alone, those kind of statements. And quite likely their tolerance for clutter, or for having a lot of stuff around them, is always going to be much higher than what your probably what your standard is, or what you would feel comfortable in. So that's something that's going to be really important if you are working with people in their homes, is to remember that, you know, it's not about you. So that's something to keep in mind. The fear and shame is those people with poor insight are probably not feeling a lot of the fear and shame, although sometimes there's sort of a, you know, both of those things are going on. So it's kind of hard. It's hard to understand sometimes, you know. Differing views on solutions is kind of a funny one, because what you'll often hear is things like, I'm just going to throw a match on it and be done with it, right? And those kinds of solutions are so extreme and you know, utterly traumatic. And of course, you know, it's most likely they're not serious about that, but it's the only way they can see their way out of this. And of course, if they did do something like that, walk away and start over, they're going to hoard in the next place anyway. So it's again, it's one of these things that we need to learn the understanding piece, and help them to learn the understanding piece. Hopelessness and burnout is something that I really want to stress, because I'm going to bet that everybody that's listening today has gone into a home and left that person with some very specific things to do over the next couple of weeks until you come back to look again. And when you come back, it looks to you like nothing has been done, that they've just sat on the couch and done nothing for the whole 2 weeks that you had left them. What I want to tell you is that they have been thinking about and working on and churning their possessions constantly for the last 2 weeks. They work on their stuff constantly. It is exhausting, and it's on and on, and they too don't see enough progress, so they feel hopeless. And they do it so much and so consistently, and they're working so hard at it that, yes, they get burnt out. They get to a point where they just throw up their hands and say, what's the point? So that's a really, really important piece. A lot, we work in, like Terri said, with that other client, that's 5 years of working with that person, with having very consistent maintenance checks and keeping that support up consistently for 5 years. It's a very it's a very long and arduous process for most people with this condition. So yeah, it's just one that I really want to stress, is that hopelessness and burnout. The personal values and overvaluation of possessions was really well illustrated in that video that we just watched, because you notice that, first of all, that brush is super, super valuable because it belongs to Jane. It's probably not valuable to anybody else on the planet, but it's certainly valuable to her. And so that's one of the ways of looking at the personal values and the possession piece. The overvaluation of possessions is where this item is worth something, partially because I own it, and partially because I've paid a lot of money for it. So I really need to be able to get something back for it. So I'm going to put this in a sale, or I'm going to market, I'm going to put this on Marketplace. And what is oftentimes really disappointing is that our possessions aren't worth very much to anybody else. And that's really sad. And it's hard for us to accept. And I'm pretty sure that you can think of one of those examples in your own life where you thought something might be worth something in sort of on a marketable kind of way, and when you tried to sell it, nobody wanted to give you that kind of money for it. I think that's something that we all experience. The resentment, mistrust of negative experiences in the past is another one that I really need to stress, that with the same amount of sort of stress as the hopelessness and burnout, because most often, if the person that you're working with is an adult and certainly later years, other people have tried to help in the past, or even we have tried to help in the past, and we only knew what we knew, and we didn't maybe do it in the right way, or we didn't talk in the right way, we didn't communicate the best way. And those negative experiences just foster this mistrust and resentment, and they just don't feel safe to let somebody in. And I would like to just kind of ask if there's any comments about any of these before we move on and let Terri talk about that feeling safe piece. Everybody kind of can relate on one level or another to all of this stuff. Most things with hoarding, I believe we all feel these feelings. We just don't feel them to the same extreme level. Would you say that's true, Terri?
Yeah. The only thing that I want to say about this before we talk about the feeling safe piece is just a little something about the differing solutions. Because either it's like Stacy said, let's just get rid of it all, put a match on it, even though we know that that's not realistic. But the other solutions we tend to hear are, well, I just need another storage unit.
Oh, yeah.
Or I'm just going to get a bigger house.
Bigger house, yeah, that was a big one. Yeah.
So these are very real solutions for these folks. And then what we find is some of the folks that we've worked with, we find out, and sometimes we don't even know at the beginning, but it sort of gets uncovered, is that there could be 5 or 6 full-size storage units. So yeah, so There's a differing view on solutions there, that is for sure. So
no matter how much space you have, you will fill it. Guaranteed. Yeah. So
yeah, unfortunately, and then there's always a plan that then afterwards we can slowly go through this stuff, and then most often what happens, I'm not saying never, but most often what happens is that doesn't happen, and then we end up getting another storage unit. So it's a little bit tricky. Okay, so let's go back to what Stacy just said about this not feeling safe piece. Okay, so it did this again. I don't know why it's doing that. I have a magical thinking that it's related to me putting myself on mute. And then when I put myself on mute and I come back again, then it won't advance. So just hang on 1 second, and I'm going to redo this. There, see, I did it. So proud of myself, the old dinosaur here. So I just want to talk about the safety piece for a couple of minutes. So there's a lot of buzz in the helping community around trauma-informed care. So we feel that this idea of trauma-informed care includes this idea of how a person feels safe, understanding sort of that physiology inside the body that tells us whether we're safe or not. And what we tend to see in our nervous systems, when we are functioning in sort of a relaxed, alert, connected state, that's sort of the parasympathetic nervous system dominance, right? We're just feeling really calm and relaxed and engaged. And then something happens in our environment and some sympathetic nervous system stuff comes into us, right? So we need that sympathetic nervous system stuff to engage in activities. And we also need it as it kind of grows inside of us if there is actual threat. And so sometimes, or not sometimes, what's happening for most of us throughout the day is that our nervous system will sort of fluctuate back and forth from sort of this parasympathetic dominance, that's that relaxed, alert, engaged piece, to this more active piece, and maybe even a more defensive piece. Like everybody's heard about that fight, flight, and freeze response. And so something happens in our environment, we respond to it, and then our system settles back down. And then something else happens. And then we respond to it, we've got this high sympathetic charge, and then our system will settle back down to that more parasympathetic dominance, that relaxed alert. And this happens throughout the day. And sometimes even more extreme things happen where we do need to engage in that fight, flight, freeze. And this is all stuff that just happens inside our bodies. This is not a cognitive process. So it's a flexible nervous system will move back and forth on a continuum, sort of on a ladder, right, between all these different nervous system states. What we see happening with a lot of the folks we work with is that they are stuck in that survival responses. There has been a long series of adverse life events, and like Stacy was talking about, sort of this mistrust, worry, fear, shame, and we tend to see people kind of stuck in this fight, flight, or freeze response. And so what might happen then is we see these folks that we're attempting to connect with or work with or help, and they might be rude to us. They might be snippy. right? That there's sort of that fight response inside. Or they might just slam the door on our faces. Or they might even leave a conversation. I've had that happen where somebody just turned around and strode away. That's that flight response. And the big one that we see is the freeze response. There's a real shutdown inside the body, inside the nervous system. The freeze response is a very high survival response. So what happens is we've made a plan with people, and our client or our family member or whatever has agreed, yeah, you know what, I'm going to work on this, and this. And then you come back, like Stacy said, and nothing's happened. And very often what we're seeing is this freeze response. It's this shutdown in the system. So if we're putting people's behavior into this sort of trauma physiology, let's call it, we can have a bit of an understanding about what's going on. And what's really important to understand is that, you know, we have this biological need to survive, which is that fight, flight, and freeze stuff. But we also have this longing to connect. And that is equally a biological response. And so when we're working with folks that are living in those threat responses, and very rarely does their system relax, they still have that longing to connect. And so what can we do to help? One thing is, if we think about it this way, and we put the behaviors into this context, and we can work towards that connection piece. And how do we do that? What are just some things that anybody can do to create the conditions for safety? So if we are a person that's coming in to doing inspections, we want to be sensitive, right? So that's watching our language, not holding your nose, watching your facial expression, those sorts of things. If we have the opportunity, we can educate the person about what they might be experiencing inside, and what those survival responses are, and talking about, well, how can we make the situation safer for you? Or, you know, even if you don't use that language, it's, would it feel nicer to have somebody with you when I come in? You know, what would help you feel more comfortable? What would be the easiest way for you to do this, right? So we're thinking about these safety pieces. There's the anxiety reduction strategies, if that's a part of you know, what you're able to do with the folks that you're working with. Can you employ some of those? And some of it might be more formal, like mindfulness and different things, just to support them to settle, their nervous system to settle. Or it can just be chit chat, right? It's like, how do we know how to engage with people just in a, you know, chit chat, or even asking about a neat thing that you saw in their home? Because remember, they're thinking about many or most of their items as treasures. And if you're able to sort of connect on that level, their nervous system might settle enough to be able to work with you. If the client does get snippy or fight with you or run away or shut down, it's nice to work toward not taking it personally and really looking at it from this physiological perspective. And the big one, which I don't have on here, is be patient. Most often there is a whole lifetime of these ongoing adverse life experiences to do with their stuff and other things. So that high sympathetic charge in their system has taken a long time to get stuck. And so the first time you attempt a nice, gentle interaction with them might not be enough. So just be patient, be patient. All right. So that's one way we can help. I'm wondering, before I start talking about this, does anybody have any questions about sort of looking at things from that nervous system, trauma-informed safety perspective? Okay. So let's talk about the harm reduction model. I would say that all of the work that Stacy and I do, we come from the harm reduction perspective. And I mentioned it sort of briefly earlier when the question was asked about recovery. So we focus on managing and mitigating the impact of the hoarding behavior, not eliminating the behavior entirely. So what that means is we really focus on safety and functionality in the home. Our goals are focused on that. So we're not focused on the better homes and gardens. The client themselves may have those goals, and those are great and fine. And what we really encourage is that first, we work on the safety and functionality. So as you can see, this home, this is a client that both Stacy and I have worked with, and there's a lot of stuff in here. And this is considered safe, and this is considered functional. So from a harm reduction perspective, this is just fine. This room passed an inspection because there is access to the window. The vents are uncovered. She can sit on the couch. She can sit place. She can walk around the coffee table. You can't see this part, but there is access to the door out sort of on the left side of the screen. There's a full egress out to the door. So let me just see. Oh yeah, okay. So harm reduction is the safety functionality piece. That's sort of the most important part of it. And then there are some other factors when we're applying harm reduction that we're wanting to keep in mind. I already talked about not stopping all the hoarding behaviors. The do no harm piece. I just want to say the do no harm piece is really about having others to collaborate with, because sometimes we're not sure if we're doing harm or not. If there's a safety issue in the home or what we're worried about, is it right to just remove somebody from the home? Is that the right thing? Or does that create more harm? What might be a better way to do it? And maybe that is the right thing. It depends on the situation. So this do no harm piece is sort of this ethical piece that we really want to have people to work on. It's very complicated. I'm just going to pull out a couple of these things. Is the person with the hoarding challenge needs to be an essential member of the team. And that's a really important concept when dealing with harm reduction. Sometimes when we're dealing with a harm reduction perspective, there are other things besides the home that need to be dealt with first. So that's sort of that case management piece. Like, what needs to happen first? Are there maybe there's some very serious health things that need to be considered, other things like that. So, and the last thing I want to say about this before we move on is sometimes we set goals and we set really good harm reduction goals, and then something happens and it's not working. So what Stacy and I just want to say is that happens, and it doesn't mean that this approach is failing or that you can't make things work. It just means that you want to be creative and flexible and and keep working at it. So this is the harm reduction and action. So this is another client that Stacy and I worked with, and the picture on the left, there are some safety issues in this picture and functional issues in this picture. Not only can you not sort of get to places, the egress is blocked, and we know that in here the vents are blocked and things like that. And then in the other picture, it's still cluttered. There's still some work that she's working on, but the functional issues are addressed. And we know, you can't see it in the picture, but the egress has been addressed, and the access to the vents and things like that has been addressed. So what I want you to pay attention to is your own response to these pictures. Because it can be hard, you know, even looking at the after picture, it can be hard to say, well, there's still lots of functional issues, or that doesn't look very good. You know, there might still be some problems, and you're right, there might be. And if we're looking from a harm reduction perspective, the safety issues and the primary functional issues have been addressed. So it's a little bit tricky. This is another example. This was a little bit more extreme. So the picture on the left is, so I'm taking this picture from the front doorway. And as you can see in the after picture, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a door all the way at the end. So there's like 2 doors. So I'm taking it from the front door in. It's the same view as this one. So this is a very extreme hoarding case. And it was very hard even to get into the home. And she was able to work on it so that she could pass her inspection in the after picture, even though technically the hallway is not a full egress because of this shelf that she's got going on there. But we were very fortunate to be working with the landlord, and they really understood that she was working very hard, and that this, from a harm reduction perspective, was so moving in the right direction. Just as a point of interest, the stuff under this shelf is all canned food. So that was one category of item that this person had, and a lot of it, I think, was even expired in there. Is that right, Stacy? Yeah, a lot of it, and she wasn't able to let that go yet, but she was able to work on it, and the landlords were working with us, so that was really great. So, are there any questions about this harm reduction perspective before we move on?
I'm going to throw a couple more comments in, Terri, that just came to me as you were speaking. When you were going through the applying harm reduction slide, it occurred to me that we don't really talk very much about your own self-care as a support worker, and to be, one of the things that you might try to just keep on track with, and is monitoring your own responses and your own feelings as you're working with somebody, because this can be really, really frustrating work. It's very slow, for one thing, and oftentimes, you get into a loop of yeah, but, or I'm keeping this item for really hard to understand reasons, and things can get very in these loops, and you can get really, really frustrated. So my comment is, or suggestion is, to make sure that you have somebody that you can debrief with, that, if you do get really frustrated, and that you can talk to somebody else about those frustrations and kind of let that out, and also to know when you've reached your limit, and that you just need to, you need to kind of get out of that situation for a while, because, I only work with clients generally in 2-hour maximum time frames, because it's hard work. It's harder for them than it is for you, and it's hard for you. So you might find that you just need to say, I've had enough for today, kind of thing. And of course, you'd have to find a nice way of exiting. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is the other speaker that we have coming to conference, and we'll talk about this later, is the leading expert in harm reduction for hoarding. So that's really going to be a really interesting part of our conference in October.
Yeah, and he also really relates it And there's going to be a focus in the conference on family and friends of folks who hoard. And so that's helpful for us as helpers and helpful for family members and friends. And it's really helpful for people with lived experience of hoarding as well. Yeah. Stacy, thank you so much for bringing up the self-care piece for helpers, because I think that is so important for people to keep in mind. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. All right. So let's get down to the Stacy, let's do it thing.
Here is when we get into the real practical stuff. And this slide is just the sort of the list of things we're going to talk about. So I'm just going to move right on to the next slide. And most of the people that I talk to have heard of SMART goals before. And of course, because we're not all live, I can't sort of do a show of hands of how many people have come across, SMART goals in their world before. But we use SMART goals as part of the work that we do with our groups, and certainly the work that I do with clients and Terri does when she's working on site with clients. We do the SMART goal method, and I've certainly heard lots of comments and people go, yeah, I've seen SMART goals, but it's amazing at how much of a challenge people have with this. So the acronym, I'm just going to focus on 2 letters in the acronym, and the specific part of the SMART goal is really challenging. What we have come across some real, people just cannot break it down to a real specific amount of space. We have had people that say their SMART goal is a whole room or a whole floor of their house, or in one case, we even had somebody say that their SMART goal for this kind of 2-week period was going to be to get their life together. So, you can't be much more ambiguous than that. So yeah, specific is really, really tough for people to get it down to. When we talk SMART goals, we're talking about a space like 1 shelf on a bookcase. We're talking something you can accomplish in about 20-25 minutes. And we ask people to sort of set these kind of goals on a daily basis, basically. I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, we would have people working on a SMART goal every day. But quite often, we're getting 1 SMART goal in a week. So yeah, just really breaking it down to something that's completely manageable. And sometimes that can be even, I need to pick out 3 items from my closet that I can donate, or 1 item that is trashed and it just has to go to recycle, or the fabric recycler, or garbage, depending on the waste management system. So it's tough for people to really be specific. One of the biggest challenges that they find with that is that they don't think they're going to see any progress if they do that. And that's where I'm going to take you right down to the bottom of the acronym and say the timely. Terri and I were just talking about this. We're going to take timely out of there, and we're going to say target area instead, because this just came this week. And we talk about the target area all the time, because the idea is that we have you go back, or we have the client go back to the target area and do another SMART goal in the same area, and another SMART goal in the same area, and keep going back to that target area so that they do see some progress. what happens when somebody's doing a little bit at the front entry and a little bit on the kitchen counter and a little bit on the bedroom dresser? They're not going to see any progress if they do that. But if they do, you know, I'm going to go to the bedroom dresser and I'm going to do 1/3 of the bedroom dresser. Or maybe I can't even do that much because, you know, 20 minutes, I might not be able to do that in 20 minutes. I'm going to do whatever I can do on the dresser in 20 minutes. And then tomorrow when I do my SMART goal, I'm going to go back to the dresser. And the next day when I go back, I'm going to do the next part of the dresser. And I'm going to keep going back to the dresser 20 minutes of SMART goal until it's done. And I cannot tell you how difficult it is to keep people on track with that. It just is a concept that seems to be incredibly challenging. So,
can I just say something about the target area, Stacy? So in our groups, it's kind of funny because we've shown a video and we've seen, there's this one lady who, I think she's from Texas, and she shows this whole, on this video, this whole sorting strategy. And so she always says, go back to the target area. And so now all of our group people, they'll all go back to the target area. So it's like, it's a big thing.
It really is a big thing. And I don't know why it's taken us so long to think of that, to change the T to target area, because it is so appropriate for our people. The other thing on the R, the relevant, I thought there was two R's in our SMART goal because relevant is really important on that, you know, priority list that people that you're looking at when you're doing that harm reduction strategy. We want to deal with the safety issues. And so, you know, my favorite example of this one is when we were checking in with some people on their SMART goals, and this one participant said, well, I was going to do my door area because I can't get the door to my apartment open all the way. So I was going to do that, but I didn't do that. I did my medicine cabinet instead, and it's perfect. And we just kind of really wanted to emphasize that it's really nice to have a perfect medicine cabinet, but it's not really going to matter if the place is on fire and the firemen can't get in, or the firefighters can't get in to rescue you, right? So we just kind of wanted to, you know, emphasize the relevant piece. And the other thing is the ready. We talk a lot about the hierarchy of sort of distress, and we don't want people to start with things that are the most difficult for them to deal with. We want people to start with things that are kind of down at the two range on the distress level. So you know, if your inherited china is super valuable to you, we don't want you to try and get rid of that first thing. We're going to try and get rid of maybe, you know, socks that have holes in them or something that's a little bit lower on the distress level. So relevant and ready are both really important parts to our SMART goals. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about the SMART goal. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? We're going to try and do one.
Hi, it's Sandra. I just want to say, when I was teaching at Mount Royal with nursing students, we always did SMART goals, but I think the way that you've described it should be patented because it's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. We've been working with those SMART goals for literally the whole 10 years that we have been running those groups, or 11 years that we've been running the groups. We check in on SMART goals. It's the first thing we do, and the last thing we do on every meeting. is check in and then set some SMART goals. And lots of times people don't do them, but we keep them on the radar all the time. So what we want to do right now is we want to illustrate just how much a person can really accomplish in such a small amount of time. So what we want you to think about right now is one small SMART goal that you might be able to do. We're going to give you 5 minutes. We're going to jump up from our seats and go and do, here's a couple of examples to give you a chance to kind of think about it for a second. Just pick up 3 things that are sitting on your kitchen counter or your coffee table and put them away. Recycle some outdated flyers or some takeout menus. Throw out something that's outdated in your fridge or pantry. Or what I really like is the things that require a decision. We often come across situations where people in our groups, because these are challenges for them as well, is they'll be doing something like they'll throw a load of laundry in, or they'll get the laundry out of the dryer, or they'll put hot soapy water in the sink to do dishes, which are all really good maintenance things to be doing, but they don't require any kind of decision making. And what we're wanting to encourage is that decision making piece. So maybe you could open your junk drawer. We all have one. Don't fib, you all have one. Open the junk drawer and see if there's 1 or 2 things that you can just get rid of. And let's see, after 5 minutes, I don't have a clock right in front of me. It's okay, it's 11.
Before we get people to head off to do that, so Stacy and I were trying to think about what could we do in our virtual groups that we can't do in our in-person groups? Like, how can we sort of make this a good learning experience? And then that was when it was like, oh yeah, like people are in their homes right now with us. So one thing is that they've been showing us, sometimes people show us their homes and different areas they're working on, which is so cool. And we've been getting them to do these 5-minute SMART goals, and people, it's like sometimes it's like these huge light bulbs going off. Oh my gosh, if I actually do this, look what I can accomplish. So yeah. When you're thinking about, and I know that many of you may not struggle with, keeping too many things or whatever. So if you want to see, well, how much can I get done with emptying the dishwasher? That's mine, because I'm not very good at keeping up on the dishes. So, what's one little area that you struggle with that you might say, I'm just going to put this 5 minutes energy on here? Or like Stacy said, what we were really encouraging with our clients is making a decision about some stuff in that junk drawer that we know that you have.
I wonder if anybody would like to share what their 5-minute SMART goal is going to be.
Well, I'm in my office. I'm not at home looking at my junk drawer, but I have a junk drawer here in my office too.
All right, well, we're going to come back to you after and see how you did. Anybody else like to share?
Okay. I have a spice drawer that I've been meaning to sort through for probably a year. I'm sure that some of the spices there are almost as old as I am. So I'm going to go over that spice drawer.
Right on, way to go.
I'm going to sort my sock drawer.
Okay.
Oh, good one.
Yeah. Okay. Who was that was going to do the socks?
Valerie.
Valerie. Okay, Valerie. All right. Who's going to do the timer here? I don't have it. Oh, it's 11:10.
We're at 11:15. We will call you back.
Right.
So, on your mark, get set, go.
One minute. Terri, are you gonna restart the while we're waiting?
I guess that's a good idea.
Just in case, well, try it, see if it'll advance.
No.
No, I think your magical thinking is correct.
I think it is too.
There you go.
Plus, we could talk without the screen just to see what people are doing, and then we can sort of see people.
Yeah.
So I think people can start coming back, hey?
Yes, we got everybody back. All right, so looks like Lisa's trying to get an extra minute in. All right, so how did everybody do on their 5-minute SMART goal? Lisa, do you want to start us off?
Well, I have now all of the elastics in one bag, so put like items together. I found that I have way too many giant paper clips, so many of them are going to go back to the storage room. Also the push pins that I don't need, they will go back to the storage room. And I found 2 name tags that I didn't even remember that I had. Oh, and all the random USB sticks, they're now in one pile. I'm not sure where they're going to end up, but they are now together.
Wonderful, good organizing, excellent. And it's great that you have a place to take the stuff that you don't need to keep at hands, hands reach kind of thing. That's right. Awesome.
I don't need to buy another storage unit because we have
one. Okay, well, if you did buy another storage unit, you would fill it. I can tell you that. Okay, Mickey, how did you do on these spices?
It wasn't as bad really as I had imagined it was. I thought I had more that were like old and expired, but I did get rid of 6 containers full of various spices.
Wow. 6, that's excellent. So let me ask you how did you feel about the time that it took to do it?
It was okay. I probably could have been more thorough with the area with a little bit more time. But still I was able to quickly, look through and just determine what have I used recently that was fine. Because I'm one of these people that takes spices out of the crappy containers and puts them all in jars. And so I was able to look and quickly pick out what I haven't used and was kind of at the back of the drawer and that kind of thing. And it didn't take very long.
Yeah.
It was just the getting around to it. And I know you know all about that.
I do. Exactly. And that's kind of the point of the exercise is just, people often say, I'm surprised that I was able to do so much in that amount of time. Right. And, so with a 20-minute time frame, think what I could accomplish. Right. So I want to check in with Valerie too and see how you did, Valerie.
If Valerie's talking, she's muted. Oh, she's showing us.
Oh, I'm not seeing Valerie.
Okay, so Valerie, unmute so that you can, Stacy can sort of see where you are there. There we go. Valerie's unmuted.
Okay, there's my cat's in my cat drawer. And there's the socks that are going.
Woo!
And so I got about half of them gone. I looked at colors I haven't worn for a couple years. I've got 3 pairs of this and 3 pairs of that, so I only need to keep 1. And I looked at the functionality. I use these when I go and work in the garden, and I use these when I go for being more dressed up. So I can close the drawer now.
So in our that's sorry, Stacy, I covered you up. You talk first.
There's the functionality of that drawer now it's more functional for you, right?
That's right. Yes.
Excellent. That's a great job. Do you have a plan for the next phase? Where are those socks going to go? Those ones that you're discarding?
Actually, I'll probably use a few of them for dusting cloths, because I can put my hand in and dust, but quite a few of them will just, you know, they're old and that, so they'll just be going to the dump. They're not good enough. They're not good enough to recycle.
Okay, great. That's okay. We have to make choices and decisions about that too. We all want to be good stewards of the environment, and we want to do, you know, we want to make the best choices in how we discard things. But you know, I mean, some things just have to go to the garbage, and that's just what has to happen. So fantastic. Does anybody else want to share what they did for just before our Terri did? What were you going to say?
Well, that's okay. Let's hear if somebody else would like to share what they did for their SMART goal.
Anybody? No, I guess we've got a bunch of shy.
Okay, I'll go. This is Lana from Valid. I had my filing cabinet sitting right next to me here. It's a true drawer filing cabinet. I wanted to go through it so I could file some stuff and kind of clear some stuff out. So in that 5 minutes, I was able to do a quick flip through both drawers, pull out a few things that I don't need to keep any longer, threw it in the shredding pile, and just then quickly went through the papers that I need to put in that filing cabinet and kind of got those organized. And then I just now have to just get those organized papers into the little quickly cleaned out files and folders. So 5 minutes, it was just a zip, zip, zip. But anyways, that's what I got done. Thanks.
That's the point though, right? The zip, 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 just what you can get done in 5 minutes. That's fantastic, Lana. Way to go.
Yeah, wonderful. So 2 things that I want to say. One thing was what you guys were described. I loved how all of these examples, people said, well, this is what I did. And then this is what I sort of was thinking about as I was making the decisions. And, or, you know, like with Valerie, it's like, this is my criteria, you know, have I worn it for a while? How many do I have? Is this in good condition? You know, and so that is exactly what we do with the folks that we work with. And we call it thinking it through.
Right.
And what are the different ways that they're going to think it through? What are the different criteria? What are the different things for the different categories? So that's so nice to hear. And then one thing I just wanted to say is in our groups, when people do their SMART goals and then they say, oh, we did this, we always do jazz hands. So I think I should do jazz hands. Yay. Yay. So, okay.
Yeah, and just one last thought on that is we really like to celebrate you know, the discarding or the decision-making piece. We really like to let people know you know, that we want to sort of encourage that. And at the same time, for you as the helper, it's really good to remember that is practice. Every time one of your clients or one of your people manages to make a decision, especially if it is to let something go, that's practice. And it doesn't matter how small of a thing it is, it helps build the motivation, build the momentum, get higher on the hierarchy of distress. They're practicing. Every time they do it, it's practice, and it's a step in the right direction. So we always want to be really sure that we're celebrating that. Okay, then the next thing that we've been starting to create some of our own documents, and also you know, we're going to other places to find these sort of documents. And so we've adapted this quick reference guide. And Terri, are you going to screen share that?
I am. I know there's a way to do it like both, but I forgot how. So sorry about that, guys. So I will do this. Can you see it?
We're just going to really quickly look at this. This is a document that I've adapted from a conference that I attended about trauma-informed interventions. And so it's called the safety checklist. And it's really a good one for you and the client to be able to determine what really is a safety issue. And it's something that I would go through with the client so that they're identifying and they're able to sort of get that perspective that they're seeing the same thing you're seeing. And so it gives pretty specific instruction in very specific sort of target areas, and then specific instructions on what that person might need to do or what that area needs, you know, it's sort of to come up to standard, what they need to do to get there. And this is another point that's really important when you're working with people who have hoarding disorder, is it's really not helpful to say to somebody with hoarding disorder to clear the doorway or clear under this kitchen sink. And it's never helpful to use words like all or every item. Those kinds of absolute language just throws them into that freeze state, because the first reaction they have is, well, I can't throw everything away. And they take it very literally. They really think that what you mean is everything must go. And so you have to be, you know, it's another part of the communication and the language that's really important. So if you were looking at this document, you would say one window per room must be unobstructed. And so if that person had, say, a dresser in front of that window, we would say, okay, well, we can't have the window obstructed, and we can only have, say, 4 items on the dresser or 6 items on the dresser, so that it's easily cleared if we need to. You know, we can't have boxes to the ceiling piled on top of the dresser. So it's very specific. It gives you an opportunity to be specific about what needs to be done in that harm reduction, but keeping in mind the safety issues and what needs to be done in order to pass an inspection, to be in a safe environment, right? So, and yeah, I think if all of these areas are, you know, up to a standard that's acceptable, is certainly acceptable to, you know, the landlord or safety standards, then the client can then sort of pick their own priorities. What's the area that most bothers me? What's the highest priority for me? Because that is the #1 question that I get from not just people with hoarding disorder, but anybody who's looking to take on organizing projects in their home, or, you know, any kind of organizing. The first thing they'll say, or first question, is, I just don't know where to start, or where do I start? And so my answer to that usually is, what area bugs you the most? And let's start there. And that's our target area, and we'll smart goal our way through that. And so if you've got all of these safety issues taken care of, you can then go to that, what area do you want to work on the most? Yeah, I think that's got it covered, unless there's some questions about this.
I just want to say how powerful what Stacy's just saying about what area do you want to work on the most, because that's where we can really link with people's values. Because, you know, for example, we talked about how many of our clients are so creative. You know, we see people with these amazing skills and abilities, say with crafting or art, and no room to do it. So, you know, several of our clients, it's been, well, I want somewhere to do my scrapbooking, you know, or I want somewhere to paint. And that's motivating. So it can be very powerful.
Truth. Our next one on the list is creating systems.
Sorry, Stacy, it won't do it again. What the heck? So irritating.
I can just introduce the idea. What we often do with, and we're going to talk a lot more about it, but Terri even mentioned it just now when we did our 5 minutes, is that thinking it through. And so creating systems is about that. It's about saying how many of these items is a reasonable number for me. And these are decisions that only your client can make, because what is a reasonable amount for you or for me is maybe not the number that your client is going to use. So when we talk about systems, really we're talking about rules. We're talking about making up rules for yourself. And you have tons of these in your own life. You say to yourself, I am not buying any more coffee mugs because I have enough coffee mugs, and that number or that amount of space is how much you want. The same applies. Yeah.
Valerie, I think Valerie was showing something. What were you showing, Valerie? Were you showing something to the, no? Oh, okay. Okay.
Pictures. She's taking pictures. It is recorded, so you can, so you'll be able to capture this stuff in the recorded version anyway.
Yeah, my stairway looks like one of these, so I took a picture to remind myself.
There you go.
Great.
Thank you for sharing that, Valerie. As you can see, the side, the no system staircase has a bunch of haphazard, random items, things that are going up, things that are coming down, very precarious. There's everything from clothing that a person could slip on. So it's really quite a hazardous scene. What the system that was developed for this client, and she had to come up with this herself, is we're going to have one pair of shoes on each stair. Ideally, I'd rather see nothing on the stairs. That would be what I would prefer, but that wasn't reasonable for her. And she decided that it would be okay to have one pair of shoes or boots on each step. And what was really kind of funny and cute about it was then she started to cheat a little bit by putting things inside the boots. But we're not going to tattle on her on that. That was just how she managed to kind of, still work it a little bit. But that was her system, and it's workable and it's maintainable. It's very, very maintainable, that one, because it's very visual. She doesn't have to remember anything really, just, look at the stairs. Things are starting to accumulate on the steps again. I need to catch that up. So that's what we mean by system. It's really just rules for yourself and for the client. And I really like to give them as much autonomy as possible when creating their rules.
Stacy, I was just wondering if she's putting socks in those boots.
She might have been. I'm not sure. I just remember seeing something sticking out of a boot once and thought, cheater. But yeah, she might have been. I don't know.
I just want to mention that most of the stuff that's on the stairs belongs to my husband. So that's my challenge of getting him to organize stuff. So that's an additional things beside my clutter. It's working with his stuff.
That's a really good point to bring up, Valerie. It's working with multi-person households, because often I'll get somebody in a home that says, well, I can't make a decision about that because it belongs to him or her, or and that does add another level of complexity to the situation, right? If this item isn't your item, you can't make a decision about it. So my best sort of advice would be to share that 5-minute SMART goal idea and just say, just pick up 2 items and put them away. And then tomorrow, pick up 2 more items and put them away, and just see if that, if it can be reduced, because it is a bit of a hazard, and it sounds to me like it's important to do that particular area. Yeah.
So there is a whole communication piece about how do we talk to one another about this. When we are in multi-person households, like Stacy was saying, it can get really tricky. And when sometimes we have, like, say, a couple who both people in the household are hoarding, and then we end up with a bit of a struggle, or just, there's some chronic disorganization or whatever. So yes, it's how you talk about it. Can you talk about it in a different way? Can you do it at a neutral time? Can you sort of identify target areas together? All of those sorts of things. And when I'm working with someone, I really encourage them to think about their own, like, can you really focus on where you're having the struggle?
Yeah.
And can you work on challenging your issues? And I don't mean you, Valerie, necessarily, right? But what happens, what I've noticed, because I've worked with lots of couples and other family members, it's like, well, I can't do that because my husband, he just won't listen. Or every time I clear off, then my husband does this. And the attention is focused on the other people. And I know that those things are true, and I know it's frustrating. And what I really invite people to do is really look at their own stuff and challenging their own assumptions, beliefs, all of those things, like what we went through with the hoarding model. And also work on, how do we communicate about this? How do we plan together? All right. But if we're just focusing on the other person and their stuff, the problem will not move in the right direction. That's my experience. Mm-hmm.
So true. So true. I just have to laugh at how I immediately jump to, here's a suggestion from me, and from Terri, it's, let's communicate about this. So I just have to
see our multidisciplinary in action.
That is how we do it. Yep. Okay, so has any other comments on systems, or anybody want to share an example of a system or rules that they have for themselves?
Or that they've helped the client identify.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to say that when you're working in a multidisciplinary team, or even if it's just you working with someone, either way, one of the things that Stacy and I do is we keep track of the systems that people have developed, even if they seem really, really small. Because, so, as I'm working with someone, I'll be like, oh, there's a system, we just figured that out, or here's a rule or whatever, and I keep track, because it can be really motivating to people to go back and say, oh yeah, I did do this system. Or it's like, yes, we set up this system, and can it be maintained? And does it actually even work? Because sometimes they don't. Like Stacy said, sometimes people cheat on their own systems. And then we're like, well, if you're cheating on your system, maybe it's not the right system, right?
The numbers are wrong, yeah. It's true. You're not always going to hit it every time. You're going to make changes and adjustments as the project develops. You know, what seems like a good number or a good space, or, you know, whatever the system you're working on, maybe that seems good for right now, but if you revisit that 6 months down the road, maybe that'll change. Maybe that will have, oh, okay, well, I was actually, I don't actually need as many of that item as I thought I did. Maybe I can get rid of a few more. Right? We're always doing more passes. I refer to it a lot when I'm working with people as first pass, second pass, third pass, because people are going to be more able to make decisions after they've lived with it for a little while, and they've discovered that maybe they don't need as much of certain areas or certain things, certain categories. And I'm often going back to the same area. I know one of the rules, one of the acronyms, I'm the queen of acronyms. One of the acronyms that you'll hear from professional organizers a lot is the Ohio rule, only handle it once. And that's not a great rule for people with hoarding disorder. It doesn't really work well. It can in certain circumstances. You know, there's no absolutes in working with these folks, but generally speaking, the only handle it once rule just it's not really helpful. So I'm just going to throw that out as an extra note on that.
Don't do that. No. So Stacy, we should probably move on because you still have some really good stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I wanted, this next slide, and this is something, and you're going to screen share again, right?
I am.
Okay. Decision making is really, really challenging for people with hoarding disorder, as you've come to know. And so we have developed our own keep or don't keep flow chart kind of thing. The first thing I'm going to say is, in any decision making process, keep it simple. Don't ask too many questions at once. So when I'm working with somebody on this, and this is going to be in your resource package, so don't worry about having it right now. What we decided, and we should just develop this year. Very often, when people are really, really struggling with where do I start, what do I, how am I going to do this? I go, just pick up an item off the counter, off the coffee table, off the dresser, just pick up an item and say, keep or don't keep. Don't worry about why I want to keep it or why I should throw it away or get rid of it. I just want to know, what's my urge? Is the urge to keep it, or is the urge to let it go? If the urge is to keep it, which in most cases, when you're working with somebody who's challenged with hoarding, their urge is going to be to keep it, because that's their automatic response, is to keep things and to acquire things. So if that's their immediate response, then they're going to go down the left side of the sheet, and they're going to say, okay, so this item, does this item have a home? If it does, then it needs to get put away. If it doesn't, my first question is, why doesn't it? If it's in my home, it needs to have a home. If it doesn't have a home, assign a category. This is right out of the Buried in Treasures book. Assign a category. So if this item came off the coffee table and it's a pair of socks, it needs to go either in the laundry basket or it needs to go in the sock drawer. And so you get that sort of that flow chart, it gets put away. in the process of doing this, what we're doing is we're slowing it down. We're stopping that, we're interrupting that automatic saving piece that many people with hoarding disorder do. It's odd that they're not thinking about saving things, they just automatically save things. So what we're doing is we're interrupting that process, and we're sort of forcing this whole thought process. And by doing that, we're hoping that with many of these items that the urge is automatically to keep, by the time the person has gone through these other 4 bubbles, they've actually given it enough time to think, well, maybe I don't need to keep this item. Maybe I can go to the other side of the page and see if there's a way that I can let this item go. And so if the person goes to the other side of the page, either instantly or after going through the keep side, there's several ways that a person can dispose of an item. And this is very important for people who with hoarding disorder, because very often they don't want things that are useful to be just tossed. That's a big one. So if I'm going to donate it, how am I going to donate it? Who am I going to donate it to? Or does it belong to somebody else? If I'm going to toss it, is it something that I can just toss in the garbage like Valerie was just doing with her socks? Is that going to be okay with me, or do I need it to go to some sort of fabric recycler, or do it, you know, what am I going to do? And we want to keep these things simple, but at the same time, we want to encourage the action. We want to encourage you to do the disposing of. We call it discarding in group, and it encompasses all the different ways to let go of an item. So if this item doesn't belong to me and it belongs to somebody else, maybe I just need to return it. Maybe it's very often we have things that need to be returned for deposit, particularly pop and bottle cans. And sometimes people have purchased items that need to be returned to the store. And so we're just trying to get people to sort of move from it's just sort of clutter to there's an action associated with it. We're going to do something. I don't really like to encourage people to get particular about which charities they support. I don't encourage selling items unless it's really necessary, and it often is. So, you know, but those things complicate the process. So once a person has decided to discard something, I really encourage the most expedient way of getting that done. And so there's always this possibility that you've done both sides of the flow chart and you still don't know. You still don't quite know if this is an item that you're going to keep. And sometimes keeping for now is a keep, right? I mean, if it's not leaving, then it's a keep. So if you still don't know, we just encourage that you have a space or a time limit on when you will return to this item and go through the process again and see where you stand at a later time. And sometimes that's all you need to do is just give it some time. One of our participants calls it percolating. Well, I need to percolate on that for a little while. So, and then they come back to it and they may have made a decision. The other piece of helping to make a decision is the second page of this. And that is, again, we've taken this out of the Buried in Treasures textbook. And this is questions about possessions. And this is about those rules we were just talking about. So the questions about possessions are, and what Mickey just did with, you know, when did I last use this spice? How much of this spice, you know, how long has it been here? That kind of stuff. So these are the questions that we encourage people to ask about their own possessions. And one of my favorites and one that I think is really important is number 16. What can I get rid of to make room for this? If I decide I want to keep this item, is there something else of some kind of similar category or similar footprint or similar, type of item that I can let go of? That's one that I really like, but there's all these 16 different questions, and rather than complicate every single decision by asking yourself 16 questions, we encourage a person to just come up with your top 3. How many do I have? Is that enough? And how many do I need, or how many seems reasonable to other people? Those are questions that a person can ask themselves. I'm just going to check. Yeah, we're getting down to the last 10 minutes here. So I just want to, the tips for success are just, just some different ways to go through the don't keep side, and just kind of have some backup, right? So if I decide to toss this, what happens if it goes to the landfill? This is one of the areas that you can be really helpful, is to be really knowledgeable about the waste management in your own community and what happens to stuff when it gets thrown out or recycled. So it's really important, because people with hoarding disorder very often are very concerned about the environment and that whole big picture. And so those are just some tips on how to dispose of things, or at least to know how you're going to dispose of things if you make that choice. So that's a new handout that we're just employing this year. I just want to say one other thing about those questions about possessions, and I think Stacy sort of said this, but it was just sticking out in my mind, is that people will develop different questions about possessions with support, often about so it'll be different questions for different categories of items. Yeah. And so, it's like we talked about that criteria, right? So, for example, Valerie had different questions about her socks. Does this, have I worn this in a while? Does this have holes? How many do I have that are already this color, right? So she developed specific questions about possessions for her category that worked for her. And so that's what people do. So that works. So, all right. So just being that queen of the acronym, at the bottom of the first page, it says, HALT. Do not attempt this if you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Decision-making does not come easily if your brain is not engaged. So I always encourage people to try and do their decision-making stuff when they are most alert and most engaged cognitively. Pick your moments, people, is what I say. So, okay, the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of practical on-site support is just to do the best you can in terms of providing disposal opportunities. So if one of your people is not able to get to the eco station or get to the charitable donation places, see if you can facilitate that in some way. I realize that with a lot of your jobs, you're not allowed to do that, but perhaps you can help brainstorm some ideas with the client about how they could do it. Perhaps you can facilitate by talking to their landlord about maybe doing some kind of a community, let's get the whole apartment building to put all their eco station stuff together and make one trip. Just doing those kinds of things to really help facilitate the getting the stuff out the door. If your community does something like we have in Edmonton called the Big Bin event, I've seen a lot of the smaller communities call it the large item pickup, and it happens a couple of times a year. So really know when this stuff is happening. Encourage your clients to jump on board and utilize those things when they happen. Those are some of the things that you can really sort of help facilitate the disposal of items, and that's part of it. So I think we have to let Terri get started on wrapping up, but any other comments or questions?
So you said any comments or questions, and then I started talking, sorry.
I have a question. It's from earlier, kind of. It's about the motivation to get help, and about external pressure being one of the most common ways to get them motivated. I wanted to ask if there's a way that, like, as a helping professional, how can we get them motivated from external pressure that's not going to be traumatic or cause any fight, flight, or freeze kind of symptom?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we like to approach motivation from a whole bunch of different areas. I think it's not one piece, and there's lots of different ways to support someone to be motivated. I'm going to say two really quick things, and then I'm just going to say that's like we do a whole kind of presentation about that. And one thing that you can do is, you know, if you take a motivational interviewing course, because we do use strategies from motivational interviewing. But here's two things that I'm just going to say, and I know it's not the whole picture page, so sorry about that. One thing is to really identify some of those values with folks. Like we talk about all these SMART goals, but see if you can get them to identify what is it that they're really wanting. You know, what might be missing from their life as a result of this problem? So is it visiting with the grandkids? Is it doing the crafts? Is it something else that's really significant? What really matters in my life? And then remind them that that's what this is about. So it's about these little SMART goals, and those little SMART goals are connected to something bigger, are connected to something important. And it's their values, not what we think is important. It's like what they think is important. So that's one thing. The other thing is, and I know I'm saying this really quickly, but just listen for change talk. Listen for if they give any little clue that they would like something to be different. So listen to those, and it might be embedded in a whole bunch of conversation about how everybody's a pain in the butt and they want me to do stuff and it doesn't make sense, you know. And I sure would, you know, I sure miss doing my leather working. And, you know, my daughter called me complaining, and right, it can be like embedded in there. And so if you're listening for the change talk, any little thing that's like, I would like this to be different, not other people are making me be different, and pull that out. So I noticed, you know, it's been a really hard day. You've had lots of negative, you know, feedback and conversation today. And I also heard you say that you're missing your leather work. I'm wondering if you could tell me more about that. So these are a couple of really, so it's a whole other presentation. Does that make sense, Paige?
It does. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So Stacy and I will be sending along a bunch of handouts, that the ones that we shared and some other things with our resources and references and all those sorts of things. We're going to be sending out information about the conference we talked about, which is on October 15th. It's virtual. It's going to be very good. And it's a one day, and we're talking top people in the hoarding field who are very good presenters. And and it's cheap. It's $75 for a day. So we're going to send out, that's the Edmonton Hoarding Coalition has organized it. We're going to be sending out information about that. And we will also send you an evaluation for this presentation, and you can do it virtually. It's really easy. It's like 4 quick questions. It takes about like 30 seconds, really. So we would so appreciate if you would fill that out. So we'll be sending that to Lisa to send out, to fan out to you guys. And then I just want to say that this final slide that we have here is from, we try to be creative in how we do our groups. And this is from an art therapy project that we did. And that was done by clients, called the Circle of Hope. And we really do believe, you know, we started with talking about stigma, and we really do believe that your interest and engagement and all of that happened today, and the good work that you're all doing out there, is what gives us hope. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Terri and Stacy. This has been a very eye-opening morning for me. I really appreciate how you have told us about the scope of this disorder, that there are so very many people on this lifelong journey, and how can we actually help them by understanding their background, by showing respect for these clients so they are heard and they are understood, and we can foster some safety so they feel safe with us and with the people that we work with. I must say I was very impressed with the photos you shared of harm reduction examples. I think it changed my expectation of what could come of, like you had said, in some cases, it was years and years of work. So that I found that very valuable. My coworker Emma has a question for you in a poll. If you could please answer this for us. Those of you in the FCSS world, you know how these outcome measures are so important for us. So Emma, how do we do this now, dear?
Did it pop up on everyone's screen? Oh yes, I can see some answers coming in. Yeah, so as soon as everybody can vote on that, then the poll will just close, and that just helps us with our reporting for FCSS.
Thank you, Emma. And thank you, participants. This has been great, and we will forward the resources and everything that we will be receiving from Terri and Stacy. Again, thank you ever so much. It was a wonderful morning.
Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your interest and care for this struggling population. Thank you.
Thanks for the good work you do.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.